Thank you so much for being here. I actually really love smaller groups, so that takes so much pressure off. So when I came up with the title for this talk, Recentring the Animal in Advocacy, I think it was deliberately provocative, because of course every movement here and every individual here today, I would argue, is centering the animal in their advocacy. Just a bit of background on myself. I run the Empathy Project. The Empathy Project is designed to, it aims to recenter, to reframe human relationships with animals, because I think the vast, should I just stop for 2 minutes and then let a few people?
Yeah, maybe just wait.
Okay, so sorry.
Because I think there are more people coming, yeah.
Oh, there's a talk, okay.
There goes your small group.
Yeah, so the Empathy Project, basically I'm a journalist, and I wanted to write about animals in ways that really brought them to the forefront of people's attention. I'll explain why as the talk goes on. The Empathy Project is basically built on 3 pillars. This idea of we love animals. Most of us don't know exactly what's happening to them. Without knowing what's happening to them, we won't move forward in this movement. So I call the second pillar grief. Much is being hidden from us. Once that comes to the light, we will grieve. It's horrendous what's happening to the majority of animals. And my last pillar is called reconciliation, this idea that we can look forward to new futures, not exactly make peace with what's happening to animals, but understand that this has happened and now it's time to change. And what are the new futures that we can paint for ourselves? The absolute key inflection point is grief. And I find conversations around grief very interesting. I think grief drives the movement, and I think we don't talk about it enough. Most of us exist in states of tightly held grief because of what's happening to the animals. And like I said again, without that second pillar, we will not reach the third pillar. And so I came into this movement with this basic understanding, or this basic assumption that people absolutely adored animals, like I did. They simply didn't know what was going on. And even now, before I came to this talk, I sort of gathered these Instagram posts. I don't want to measure the world in terms of Instagram posts, but you have here a yawning squirrel with 16.6 thousand likes. You have this delightful, the dog and the duck playing together, 149,000 likes. You have this picture of this man who rescued his 4 dogs from a flood in Brazil with 181,000 likes. I don't want to base everything on numbers, like I said, but I truly believe that there is a strong desire for connection with animal species amongst most people that we know. But a couple of things really alerted me to the fact that people say they love, but they don't act in congruence with that love. I was a school speaker for about 5 years, and I would go into schools and I'd show them PowerPoints of animals in truly dreadful situations, and I would turn around to the bunch of secondary school kids and I'd be met with blank gazes. And I think at one point I finally realized, how can I expect children or the people in this room to care, not this room, the rooms that I used to speak to care about animals if they've never essentially encountered them? I was asking children to care deeply about an animal who they'd never met. The closest that the kids in this East London urban school had probably ever come to a pig was the ham in their ham sandwich. And at the same time I was presenting them with quite traumatizing images. How could I expect them to make a connection? And that was one instance where I started to question, yes, people say they love, but do they know? And the next instance where, again, I thought we have to work on this is about a month ago. I was doing a workshop with a really wonderful woman who specializes in nature connection workshops. She's deeply, deeply sort of embedded in the nature community. She's a soulful, compassionate, sweet, kind person. And she turned around to me during one of our workshops and she said, "Did you know I saw this video where this cow was snuggling into the arms of their rescuer?" And I said, yes, that's what cows do when they don't feel threatened and frightened. And I think what worried me most about this was that she had no idea what cows would or would not do, despite having worked for years in nature connection, and it really did. This was the third thing that made me wonder. When I first heard about Veronica the cow, who could use a brush, a broom to scratch her own back, I don't know about you, but I wasn't surprised at all. And yet the scientific community leapt on this story as if it was the most amazing thing that they'd ever heard. And again, I use this example to demonstrate that where we assume that people care and know about the animals that we advocate for, perhaps we need to question just how much they do know. Because this is the key question: what would change if they did? My beautiful friend in Nature Connection who talked to me about the cow, she needs still to do some work, because the last time I saw her, she was having milk in her tea. But it's this idea of, this is a picture from Iceland, where they regularly hunt the whales, the pilot whales. Does anyone know about the grind? So, but through a particular season, they round up bottlenose dolphin and whales, and they wade into the waters, and they, there's no easy way to put it, I'm sorry, they hack them to death. And it's really pitiful and painful, you know, and the family group sort of circled desperately. And I was speaking to Sea Shepherd, who have campaigned relentlessly to stop this practice, and I said, what do they think the animals are? And she said, they think they're fish, and that therefore they shouldn't worry too much about them. They're probably not that clever, or, you know. And she said even Faroese women have come up to her and said, why don't you tell the stories about these incredible creatures? Why don't you tell the stories about how long it takes them to procreate, how caring they are as mothers and parents, the huge distances they travel. So there is a huge gap for stories, and I've just come from Rebecca Loviconi's amazing talk about stories about animals, but what are the stories that we should tell? Well, I don't think they really, I've put these two up as examples of stories that I don't think we need to worry about now. It is wonderful. This is a little bird called the juvenile bar-tailed godwit, 6 months old. He's broken the world record for the longest non-stop flight ever recorded by a bird. It's an incredible story. Or this one, foxes use the Earth's magnetic fields to hunt. It's an incredible story. I love these stories, but they aren't ones that change hearts. They stimulate minds. They make us, they fill us with awe. But it's slightly the David Attenborough effect. You know, when you can watch a David Attenborough documentary, everything's beautiful and wild and gorgeous, but essentially there's not too much questioning of the circumstances in which that animal exists. There's this idea that everything is kind of okay, and we're watching the animals perform as scientists. What I would like to introduce instead in the stories that we tell was introduced by Mark Beckhoff and Jessica Pierce, but also instinctively you start to understand are animals as feeling, empathetic, compassionate individuals as themselves, in themselves. So Mark Beckhoff, for example, tells the story of Ghana, a gorilla in a zoo who carried her dead baby for days because she could not understand why he wasn't moving, and everyone who watched Ghana could see that this was really grieving. She was terribly, terribly distraught. And then he also tells the story about the little rats in a laboratory who were given a choice between freeing their friend from a tube or chocolate chips. And the rats almost always chose to try and save their friend first, and then would share the chocolate chips. So these, I think, are the kind of stories that will appeal outside even our movement to ordinary people, like, you know, my in-laws, you know, would love to hear these stories even though they still eat meat. We're talking about animals as sentient beings who deserve our attention. More of these stories, for example, wolf packs lead with their elderly, which again I find such a beautiful idea that they will identify those in their pack that can't move as fast, and in order to keep them safe, will put them at the front of the pack. Or this incredible story as well, where this whale was rescued. It was very tangled in fishing lines. It was rescued by these divers and appeared to go up to each whale, and thank each whale. And I think if we tell these stories, again, we just activate this kind of hearts and minds. This is another story I really want to tell. And it's a viral video. I mean, anyone can watch this video. This cow was rescued from the slaughterhouse. She was pregnant. She gave birth. And during the birth process, she just started licking her rescuer's head. He was so taken aback at the beginning, and then she's just constantly licking him. And I think this is such a beautiful story. What you don't see here in the image is the fact that she sees the rescuer just wrapping her calf with a cloth, and she just tries to pick up a corner of the cloth and do the same. And I tell that little detail because I think it implies how watchful we need to be with our animals to see even their smallest motions and try and understand those. Because, and this is the last story, which I have heard quite a few times. John Oberg covers it. This little pig here, she worked out how to release herself from her crate, and then instead of doing a runner, she then went along, and you can see it in the video, along the line and released all of her other sisters. And these are the stories of compassion that I wish people knew more about. John Oberg says pigs are the fourth most intelligent animal on the planet, yet what do we do to them? We abuse them to the nth degree. And I think that is a really painful contrast between knowing who the animal is and what she's capable of, and the compassion and intelligence of those animals, and then you lay that alongside of their imprisonment, their constant sort of impregnation, losing their babies, the way they become the fundament of a cruel industry. Because I do want to challenge this thing in the movement. I think we get lost in talking, even us with our big hearts get lost in talking about animals as aggregates. I absolutely understand that. We've got so much work to do. We can't constantly focus on the individual. We'll be lost. We'll be on our knees. We'll be incredibly sad. And actually, this is a quote from someone who read this incredible book, Animals and the Right to Politics. But she talks about this idea of the minimal animal. Donaldson and Komplinka go way beyond the criticism of anthropodenialism, which I'll come back to explain how, perhaps inadvertently, perhaps out of fear of anthropomorphism, the animal rights movement conveys an overly simplistic image of animals. This simplification takes typically two forms. We reduce them to victims, or we highlight their agency, but only in terms of resistance. And I think there's a missing piece here about going back to the pigs and the whales, of all the compassion and empathy that exists in animals today. I want to give you a difficult case study. Orella was a dog who was killed by a group of teenagers earlier this year. And I think there are lots of questions about that, why a group of teenagers decides it's cool to go out and kill a dog. But his murder has prompted, as you can see, outrage across Brazil. I've never seen anything like it, actually, for a single animal. They have filled the streets of Sao Paulo with calls for justice for the killers. They did a float in the Rio Carnival dedicated to Orella. There have been news programs. They've created Orella's Law, a new sort of animal rights law in Brazil. There is a veterinary center opened who's dedicated to Orella. They are now trying to campaign to rename the beach that he used to play on as Playa Orella. He's one individual. And I sat back after I still grieve for him, and thought, why is it this one individual has inspired this movement? It's because so many people knew his story. There are clips across social media of Orella playing in the sand, playing in the water, sitting alongside people at beaches, photobombing weddings. He's a real individual, and you can see it. So his loss, the savagery of his death, when you put those together, has inspired this huge movement. Now, I would argue that every animal that we lose to animal agriculture, experimentation, entertainment deserves exactly this kind of attention. And the fact that Orwella managed to galvanize that through his personality and his story, I think is something that we need to look to. There are signs of change. These beautiful sort of raising hair. Chloe Dalton she rescues a small leveret, and she writes a book about him, and it's on bestseller lists. I think everyone knows My Octopus Teacher. In fiction or filmmaking, we've got this idea of ochre, which I have to admit I actually haven't watched because I have to be careful what I watch. But there is also this, which is, has anyone heard about Why Look at Animals? It's a massive 4-floor exhibition in Athens Museum of Contemporary Art, solely dedicated to animal rights art. It's on till the end of March, I think. If you can go to Athens, it's groundbreaking. But again, almost every image there is about the animal as an individual who we need to take into account of. More case studies just to show you who has been doing it. The Animal Rising campaign for Charlie, which really focused on the single pig that they managed to rescue, was really, really beautiful in many ways. But I was still frustrated with it because it was still that talking of the animal in aggregate until this moment in the film where Alice Bruff just says, Charlie. So in the film, there's a lot of, there's a lot about how pigs suffer, what they endure, how the rescue was carried out. But Alice talked about Charlie as the individual. And suddenly, I connected so emotionally with the story. Charlie came bounding up to us. She was super inquisitive and bright, very excited to see new people, which is amazing considering everything she's been through. And again, you lay that, her strong and joyful personality, against everything that's happening to her brothers and sisters in the factory farm. Here is another one, case study. So We Animals, everyone's heard of We Animals, I hope. Yes, photography agency founded by a photographer called Joanne MacArthur, and her photographers and Joanne herself has a way of just focusing on the individual and the mass. So something else that Rebecca Loviconi was talking about downstairs is you focus on the individual in the mass, and it's not just this image again, which I start with, of this little pig, the individual in the mass, but also what Joanne says about her. It resonated so strongly. My mind returns to this photograph, this piglet. I watched her for a few moments as she lay here looking at the outdoors through the drainage hole and then lay her head down on the dirty concrete as you see her here. So that moment of soulful reflection that so many people outside of this room, outside of this space, do not know that animals are capable of. That moment where she looks at the world that's so close and yet so far, the potential of freedom that she will never have, and then just quietly accepts her fate by resting her head on the dirty concrete, as you see here. And of course, again, we know exactly what happened to her. Where is the potential for this kind of language? We're also time poor, we're also cash poor. We have to target our campaigns. We have to think about where every pound goes. And I actually found that its greatest potential is in our street outreach. So one day I spent some time with Anonymous for the Voiceless, and one of the clips that they were showing was a cow, not this one actually, it was a young bull in another clip, and he was being killed, a bolt to the head. And unfortunately, he needed 3 bolts to the head before he could pass. And the young woman that I was standing with was so obviously distressed and disturbed that I had to step away from my script. My script was very much like, do you think it's ethical to treat animals in this way? Do you think it's, it was much more head-based. And I looked at this young woman and we just started talking through what was happening. And the language, I was at the beginning of my journey here, but I was speaking about him as an individual, very much as an individual, like who he was, who he loved, what he's feeling right now. How can we tell? Did he deserve this? What can we do to help him, to remember him? How can we work together to do that? And I think at one point, and I'm not a religious person, I just went, bless him. And I was talking about him like a human, which is something that I would like to see us more adopt a lot more. So in these animal rights talks that I used to give in schools, and I was becoming very frustrated with the endless scenes of animal suffering. And one day, luckily or not luckily, my computer wouldn't work, so I had no access to the materials. So I was faced with a schoolroom full of children, and I thought, well, what am I going to talk to them for an hour about? And I scrabbled around, and I found this clip on the dodo, which is, does everyone know the dodo? It's amazing how much material is out there that we can use. So I brought up this clip that I'd seen before of Hobbs the puppy, who was having a really, really tricksy time getting down the steps. Now Hobbs was just being a puppy, so he was throwing a tantrum and he was trying to distract his human, and he was like going, no, we're not gonna. He was being utterly delightful, and his human just steps up, gets on his hands and knees, and takes him down the stairs. And for a minute and a half, it is the most utterly delightful video. But for the kids, they're starting to go, wait, I felt like that before. I was really scared about something, and I did what that puppy did. And then maybe or maybe not, a kind human came or a kind adult came and maybe helped me through this difficult situation. So in many ways, I found this even more valuable than the material I've been working with, because it showed not only that the puppy was an individual who was like them, but it also offered an adult who could model with them new ways of recognizing animals as individuals. It takes us into a tricksy area. This is this idea, are we going to anthropomorphize? And I think actually the animal rights movement has been dancing around this a little bit. We can't ascribe human emotions to the animals. And I actually asked sorry, I thought his quote was going to be out here. A lawyer, yes, here we go. A lawyer about this. I said, isn't it dangerous to ascribe human emotions? This is a long time ago now. Because even these guys here, the rescuer, when he was reporting back on the story, said, you hate to anthropomorphize too much, but the whale was doing little dives and the guys were rubbing shoulders with it. Sorry. I don't know for sure what it was thinking, but it's something I will always remember. It was just too cool. And I've written here, what if exactly that whale was exactly thanking them? And we hate to anthropomorphize too much, but maybe if we anthropomorphize, what are the details that we are missing? And I'd rather go the other way now. I think pretending that they don't share emotions with us is not moving the movement fast enough. So I asked this lecturer in law at the University of Leicester, Dr. Joe Wills, and I said, do we need to be worried about anthropomorphism? And he said, no. The biggest problem currently is anthropodenialism, the human tendency to ignore that we are animals and the other species are our evolutionary, biological and psychological kin. We share many capacities with the animals we exploit, our emotions, our vulnerability, our desires, our preferences, our relations of care. Yet people choose to live in denial about these connections because they impugn present practices. Not only do they impugn present practices, they make present practices a heck of a lot more difficult. How can you impregnate a sow and take her children if you essentially see your connection with her? So I think that actually the use of anthropodenialism is a tool used by capitalist and extractive systems. But we do face a challenge. We need to find new ways of talking about animals as well as listening to them. And I think this is actually exciting. Okay, we are being invited to create new lexicons, new epistemologies. And the reason I say that is I still don't know. These are my two dogs. This is Tia. This is Mouse. Mouse is the OG. She's 11. She doesn't look 11. But she's the one who first made me think, hang on, there's so much more. I love dogs. But until Mouse, she made me think so hard about who they are and what they feel. She's done so many things. They've just broken over my heart in the most joyful way. Tell you one, we had some friends round and their baby came round and grabbed her bottom quite hard. And she whipped round, she registered that this was a very young human, and then she just looked back out the window. if it had been me, I think she would have actually given me a bit of a telling off. And the fact that she could recognize a young hand and a young soul, I think, again, is indicating to us that these are far more complex beings that we know. And I can't describe to you my love for these animals. I love them so much, and sometimes they feel like my children, but sometimes they feel like my teachers. Like, I think we need to find new words to explore our relationship with animals. I think this is beautiful work, because the word love is inadequate. They're almost tied into me physically and through my soul. And one day I was just listening to her drink water, Mouse, and I felt so happy, because upstairs, the water bowl was upstairs, was an animal who was safe, who felt that she could take care of herself, was nourishing herself, would come back down later and say hello. I think this is fundamental to the movement, but I also think it's so joyful. This picture, this is the joyful part of animal activism. It's taken in a place called Capra Libera Tutti Sanctuary. Please find out more about it. Its founder is currently somewhere else in another room giving a speech right now. His name is Simone, and he has so much to say about the sanctuary movement. So, like I said, wonderful work. I will try and speak as quickly as possible. Animals are actually their best advocates. We need to remember this. When we really watch them and pay attention to them, there is no better spokesperson for the animal rights movement than an animal. They don't, unfortunately, have a language that we yet care to understand. That we yet understand. I sometimes get a bit cutting about people outside this room. So we have to become the interface, which also means managing expectations. Sometimes the dog is not going to come running up to you full of love, but that's okay. But we become the interface between the wider world and animals. Through our care, through our attention, and through our humility, we share their extraordinary stories, and we learn from animals. Very interested in this idea. We reframe animals as teachers, companions, and guides. We have so much to learn from them. They are plugged into the wild world in ways that humans can only dream about. We link to other justice movements. I do believe in the potential of that. Social justice, feminism, ableism. We have to, climate, I do a lot of talks about climate and animals, nature and animals. We have to bring those to the fore. The nature becomes more inclusive if you just focus on the animal, not the diet. Everyone says they love animals. I can talk to my in-laws all day about how much they love animals. But then I start nudging them. Every time I go up to see them, my mother-in-law now cooks me a vegan meal. And for me, that's actually progress. We encourage connection to the natural world. 2 minutes left, sorry. So animals, I think, are portals to a deeper connection with the natural world. I wasn't really a very spiritual person until I started thinking deeply about animals. They are extraordinary. And also we interrogate systems. So a short sentence for very big concepts. I was talking to Helen Maitland from Animal Think Tank. If you truly center animal justice, you start to question the entire economic system, which is built on exploitation. The potential is huge, but it also makes us very central to building new worlds. This is this idea of connection with nature. I'm going to skip over that, please ask me. And there's this idea finally of can we build and vision new worlds. I love this piece of art. It's called Refuge for Resurgence, and this is a table for all species. This is a future where we could sit alongside monkey, cow, crow, child, all eat together. So this artist actually, or this duo of artists actually created cutlery for each species. And it's such a beautiful artwork. When I saw it at the Barbican, I just stopped. I've loved it ever since. But that's the idea. And I just think also animal rights activists, we are genuinely at the forefront of an evolution. Through animal activism, we are being invited to occupy complex mind states, to occupy the past and the present and the future, the concrete and the mystical, to advocate for change in the present and the future. We're building new worlds. We challenge the extractivist, colonialist, exploitative times we live in. It puts us in service to the wild world through her animals, to her animals. And there's this idea of moving from ego, where we definitely are now, with men on the top, so rude, from eco even, where we are part of the whole, to this idea that we are actually in service, we're working for them now. And I actually love that way of seeing this world. It's a rebalancing we need hugely. Thank you so much.